Well, I'm going to read this out aloud so it sinks in to me as well as you. The liberation of women in the Second World War ended when the soldiers came home. In 1949, stories from the woman's point of view dominated the comic book industry and proved a threat too far. This was the feminism inherent within the romance comics. This extraordinary success story drew the attention of the virulent anti-communism of Senator Joseph McCarthy. Now, if you're talking about females, the 20th century, especially in the comic books, but not only in the comic books, is Little Orphan Annie, who was syndicated in the newspaper strips from 1924 and is almost like the moral conscience of America. And they were just very, very intelligent and literate, and had there been such a thing as a great American novel, I would recommend Orphan Annie as the prime contender. Next one. Now, this is one of the earliest women created newspaper comic strips. And this is Tarp Mills, who created Miss Fury, the figure at the back there, and that was early 1941. And it was almost like a herald to the Second World War, which America was preparing to enter into. And this is, she got involved later on with Nazis hiding. And but the line I find so extravagant and magnificent and so strong and quite unlike anything else in the culture of the comic strip and the comic book. But what she did develop was, or she said she was, it was very bizarre. I mean, something like that is not unusual. It's unusual, but not in this strip. And when she died in, I think, 68, her body wasn't found for a long time. I mean, like a week or something. And all her artwork had been stolen. And so that's a mystery I know nothing more about. Can you go to the next one, please? Now, of course, you can't talk about feminism without considering the early Wonder Woman, who was conceived by a psychologist, William Moulton Morton, to try and exploit the market that the superheroes, such as Superman and Batman, had brought about since 1938. And this is drawn by H.G. Peter and Marston. The combination was fantastic. And one of the rare examples in comic books where you've got really like a very, very good combination of writer and artist separately. Whereas the newspaper strips, they would have been more, the writer would have been the artist as well. But in the comic book, that was all part of the New World. And she was very much, I suppose, historically glorified by Gloria Steinem, one of the early feminists. And she often referred to Wonder Woman and wrote some interesting introductions, but only for the Wonder Woman from 41 to 47, because after that it just became, dare I say, pedestrian. But I mean, I just think these drawings are wonderful. Let's go on to the next one. See, here she is to explain her what she was about. That's Dr. Psycho, a man rebuffed in love and rather short on height. And he's, he was a Hitlerite, and eventually captured Wonder Woman, but she got free. But it's a whole saga of this misogynist dedicated to the subjugation of women. And that's the early wartime America. Incidentally, the creator, Marsden, William Moulton Marsden, yes, he invented the lie detector. I was just looking at the wires there. And one of her great powers was she had this lasso which she could snare anybody in and they'd have to tell the truth. And he obviously tricked her because he got her, that's her her rope on the side there. Okay, there's a lot to get. Now, the romance phenomenon of 49, a lot of people attribute it to the work of Simon and Kirby. And this is who did A Young Love, I think it was, in 1947, which was, I think, one of the first comic books outside of superheroes to sell 1 million a month. And here is a particularly, I find, unpleasant story indicative of the work of Simon and Kirby in the romance field. He actually created Captain America, that couple, which during the wartime, I mean, was immeasurably popular, fighting for the American cause. And this is a captain who's been put in Berlin post-war, and he's fallen in love with the girl who looks after him, but then his fiancée comes over from America. Can I have the next one, please? And she gives her opinion. She says, you know, you've got a humble dish rag, that servant. She's just another one of those German survivors that are exploitative and after you. And he says, Helen, you're being extremely distasteful. The difference between you and Ilse is apparent now. My choice of Ilse is thoroughly justified. But then one of his seniors gets hold of him, and the fiancée hammers him, and finally he sees the light. You know, I have a cocker spaniel at home who gives me the same deal, and what's more, he eats less. Now, next one. This is an example of one of the Simon and Kirby things in the post-49, or I think 1949, which is when this explosion of romance comics took over. I mean, within a few months, there were like, I think, 30 titles just came onto the market. And they sold the thousands, then the 100,000s, but it was so fast, nobody knew what was going on, because it was just all stories about women. Women came into the production there. But anyhow, this is an example of why I don't attribute the nature of the women's comics to Simon and Kirby, because to me that is a punch delivered by Captain America, and all the stories are a bit like that. By contrast, I'm now going to show you the next one, which is the sort of stories that got to me and touched me tremendously. This is probably 1950, and there are a lot of these. The girl works in a boutique. She borrows an exclusive dress. She's seen by the owner and the manageress, and of course she flees, next one, and tears the dress. Meanwhile, she's fallen in love with this chap, pretending that because of the dress and the magic of this very expensive high couture dress, that she is more than she appears to be. Meanwhile, he had been pretending to be, he was delivering a luxury car, and of course he said it was his own. So the truth comes out, and they finally proceed along the course of the American dream by admitting the pretense of their existence and getting together anyway. And but I mean, for me, reading some of the, go to the next one, the tensions and the gripping aspect of this. This is also, bear in mind, post-film noir. And the film noir, well, I mean, not post, but after film noir had started. Because you could slice the beginning with a knife, 1949. You could slice the end with a knife, 1954. And that's how the influence of McCarthy comes into this. But this is two sisters, a very, very common theme. And the nasty conflicts between them. I mean, so many of these stories are so well conceived, and yet they were like produced at such speed and such a rate. And at times I used to think of this as true proletarian literature, is the word I use, which at the museum they don't approve of, I have to say. And it's also the beginning of psychiatry. And so the plain sister is bullied by the good-looking sister, and then they fight over a man, and it all... But I mean, they are all vignettes, and yet they seem to, for me anyway, and for millions of people at the time, convey something very considerable. You see, this is another story. This young girl is abused by a stepfather, and she ends up on the psychiatric couch when she's grown up, and she's told, you know, it's all right to hate your father. The subtext is, but he was your stepfather. And next one. And this is an example. There was a radio show at the time, I think that's 1950. Look at those glasses. I can't get over those glasses. And, you know, it's a lot of psychology. And again, it's the introduction of hypnotism as a psychiatric tool. And it's just beginning. And that's the radio program. It's probably the actual opposing from the thing. I don't think it's improvised. Okay. Now, this is actually... Generally, you see, what was so interesting about this, most of the artists weren't signed, nobody knows who they were, don't know who the writers were, but this is one which I recognise, Mortlev, because he was in the straightforward comic book world, and he did a lot of very significant work, and he's got a quality to his line. And this is, again, a typical thing. The fiancé sees she sees her fiancé in a jewelry store with another woman, and her insane jealousy is a lot of abnormal jealousy is the implication. I think possibly because Americans aren't supposed to be jealous. They're not supposed to have bad emotions. So always lurking behind all of this is an extraordinary portrait of America. Anyhow, she accuses the fiancé of betraying her, and it turns out that he was just going to buy, he'd taken his secretary or somebody with him to buy her birthday present. And of course that relationship breaks up. I mean, there's a lot of truthful sentiment in these things. It's not all happy endings. Oh my God, I don't know if you recognise that lady there, but I got quite surprised. Absolutely, I mean, it's amazing. This woman, a wealthy woman, goes to an orphanage, and there's a girl who's the best graduate of the orphanage school, and she employs her to be a maid, not a secretary. And it's a story of tremendous exploitation. And this, again, is one of those, you know, typical stories, runaway wife, her dreams of what she wants to be. And of course the story unfolds, and she becomes that. I mean, some of the vile aspects portrayed in this are stuff that I don't feel I've seen in movies, not even in film noir. And often I have to tell you, reading some of these stories, I had to stop, which doesn't happen, you know, with other comic books for me. And I have to recoup my breath. Now, I never read these things in childhood, but I started seeing the figures about them, and I thought, hang on, this is significant, I'd better start reading them. So I started reading them, I started buying them, and I couldn't stop. And it took over completely. You see, those are just some typical ones, covers. I mean, that's a hangover from the days of the pulp fiction novels, that sort of painted cover. And that's, well, that says what you can see it says, you know, and just what do I have to, what do I have to, it's got a bit fuzzy there. What do I have to get?
Must I do?
What do I have to do? Yes, I'm afraid it's not sharp. It's not, the printing is sharp, but it's the thing. All right, next one. This is a rarity in the sense it's a church story. There's a spire in the back, and that's a very churchy fellow who's highly repressed, and he works for that. His fiancée's father who's a rancher, and he wants to, she wants to get into romance rather seriously, and he's so prim and proper he freaks, and he turns out to be an attempted murderer, and it's wild, you know. Now there you can see the impact of film noir, very much so, in the kind of the lighting on the cinema. And it's this girl who had lied about something and ruined this chap, her boyfriend's career in the chemistry world or something. And she'd been brought up in court, and she was sentenced to not put away, but she could never practice in that profession again. Somehow she got back into a job somewhere, and the man she had wronged appears, and she's in love with that one, and that's the one from the past that comes, and she's caught between the two of them, and all her lies explode in her face, and it's an unhappy ending, I must tell you. Now this, I don't know if you know a film from 1949 called Gun Crazy. And interesting, this relates to the period. The film was written by Dalton Trumbo, one of the Hollywood 10, but it was written under another name, Michael Kaufman, I think it was. And this is a rip-off of the story of Gun Crazy, which incidentally was one of the most influential American movies to reach into the French New Wave. And Godard was a great fan of it. It's a remarkable film. It's sort of like a B feature, but it's so lively. Now this is about the same time, 1950, and it's just interesting. They used to steal from anywhere, and there was nobody to prosecute. These things just swept across the board. Nothing was signed. The publisher often went under. In total, over 5 years, there were 300 titles. And this is just one story about the Gun Crazy, which ends the way the movie does. But it's pretty good artwork, actually, I think, and quite sensual. You don't see a lot of that in these romance comics with a female figure like that. It's a lot of it is dresses and all of those details. But it does cover the entire spectrum. Now, Hollywood magazines diminished during this period because romance was so powerful. And before 1949, the big thing on the newsstands would have been all these movie magazines. And they really just shrunk overnight. And these are typical of what was done in the comic books. They used these wonderful glossy pictures of faces you're probably familiar with. And inside was just more of the romance films. I mean, sometimes you think, oh, it's got the movie in it. But it doesn't usually. It's just got a text in the middle. And it's just more of the romance comics, those stories. I suppose, what is it? It's melodrama. It's relationships. That's the thing about it. You know, between sisters and, oh, it's lovely. Oh, that's another one, right? And of course, there's a whole slab of stuff about communism. And even although this was all very good and would support seemed to support Senator McCarthy, it was too out of control, in my opinion, for him to be able to see it as helping him. Yeah. I mean, first of all, there's all these women who, you know, had taken over the industry. They outsold Superman, all the superheroes. They outsold all the westerns, all of them. And if you went to a news rack in the early 50s, you'd see that with all the comics when they were, you know, really big, selling in the millions, you'd see more than half were romance comics. And this is the one where the good girl was duped into helping to trap her flatmate, who was actually a communist or supported as a spy. He says, and she feels bad about him. He says, Don't. Spying is an evil thing, sweetheart. That's a boyfriend, sorry. We must fight it with all our might if we're to ensure our future. Now, this is another one. There's a pedagogue, and this clean-cut fellow, he's in shadow there, his girlfriend has got caught up with this pedagogue. And she goes to the pedagogue who's the leader of some group, which seems innocent enough, but the boyfriend knows is not innocent enough. And he tells her that he's going to go to the FBI and report these people. So the pedagogue says, look, let me meet up with him, and then I will explain that he's got entirely the wrong point of view. So she arranges the meeting, and of course the communist spy pulls out a gun and shoots her boyfriend. End of story. What has she done? The girl, she was the decoy, so she's a criminal also. Next. Oh, how's the time going? All right. And this is just another one. It's a military thing. Something about an atom bomb in Germany, and the daughter of the colonel or something is accused of betraying somebody, and it's really somebody else. It's the process of who's found out, and she slaps. There's a lot of slapping in these stories, I have to tell you. And she slaps her father's assistant because she feels he's just a Guinea and everything. And the nice guy, who seems to be the nice guy, turns out to be, he was working with the Nazis post-war. As soon as I knew our chance was lost, I began sending them information to gain their confidence for the time when I'd be in a position to further the post-war Nazi cause. I have a force of ex-stormtroopers ready tonight. We seize the A-bomb and explode them, all in Russian territory. But the good guy comes at the end. Now this is... Look at that face there, and that face there. The men mainly. And it just tells the story with such graphic acumen that it's... And this is by the artwork. Her fiance is in the Korean War. This is all the early 50s. And this chap is trying to lure her away from her boyfriend because he didn't join up. And she's in a tiz about what to do. And it's, and he's like, it's grooming and manipulation, how he gets the girl. And he says, the boyfriend's never coming back anyhow. He's a dead cause. But this is by an artist called Reed Crandall, who worked for Quality Comics, which did some very fine romance comics. And he did The Black Hawks, was one of the ones he was most famous for, which was very... Now, this is the unmistakable artistry of Bob Powell. You can tell from the lips. The most sensual, the most fluid. I mean, you'll see some more. It's just, the line is just wonderful. And look at the shading of the comic books. And all his work is like this. He did some great westerns. He did crime. He did everything. But he did romance. And this is a story of a lawyer who gets the accused murderer, or she falls in love with him and gets him out of prison. And of course it turns out that he was guilty. And next one, sorry. And you can look at that face. You could tell she shouldn't have trusted him. But what kind of a lawyer was she? And look at that hair, and look at those lines there. That's just a frame, and they do hundreds of these, and they all. That's what I mean by the lips. You see, they are. It's like his signature image. That chap hasn't got lips so much, but she has down there. All right, next one. And this is. Do you know this might also be Reed Crandall? I'm but no, it's not quite. It looks like him. And this is about two girlfriends. And the one girl fancies the boyfriend, so she manages to persuade her good, clean-cut friend to dump this boy. And she does it with lies, deception, and duplicity. And it's a bit chilling. And he's... I mean, the males very often in this don't really stack up, as they say. They're pretty two-dimensional sometimes, and it's mostly the interaction between women. Next one. But the good girl works at the airport, and she gets this girl who's won the boyfriend, she gets her to confess to her what she did, and she switches on the intercom, and he's downstairs. Gloria! And he hears a voice coming over. I mean, look at those lines there. I mean, the grammar I find terrific, besides the frames. And that one also there, the way that is good. And that's it, so they get back together. Betrayal is exposed. Oh, now this is stunning. And the story of this. Mother, daughter. Daughter wants to marry somebody mother thinks is highly unsuitable. Mother appears with a hand in a bandage, I haven't got it there, and asks her daughter to write her name on the check and go and cash it. Innocent enough. The daughter goes and does it and cashes it and brings the money back to her mother. And the daughter says, "Oh, your hand's not wrapped up anymore." No, I've got, that check is proof that you've stolen money from your own mother. And so if you marry that guy, I go to the police. How's that for mother love? And this is back to Bob Powell. And it's, what's the time? Is there a clock? Oh, right. This is Bob Powell again, with those nice lines and the recognisable. Well, the lips aren't so pronounced, so I wasn't sure it was him at first. A Double Jeopardy, probably influenced by a title of a movie. And she helps this chap who's on the run, who's a criminal, who persuades her not to turn, she's a nurse, turn him in. Actually, it turns out that he was an FBI agent, and everything is resolved. And look at that wink from the mother, who always liked the spivvy fellow anyway. I mean, now, I've been showing you mostly, almost entirely the white world. This is, we're going to the black minority press. And there was this woman, Jackie Ormes, who was a star in her own right. And she, for me, was almost like a continuation or a transfer from Little Orphan Annie, changing into an adult woman. Orphan Annie was still going at this time, but she never grew up. And this is her grown up, but in the black press. And what she dealt with was sort of stuff Americans weren't dealing with. I mean, that's the story. She meets this little boy at a lakeside. She's a nurse. And he takes to her and he's talking when suddenly he realizes, oh my God, I'm not supposed to be talking to you. You're from over there. But it's a colour thing. Anyway, so next one. So he runs away. And that's Jackie Ormes, who was in Chicago. And that's her, I think, with Count Basie. And she created black dolls, put that on the market, and was obviously a very astute businesswoman. And but all her stories were like with a social conscience. But there was nothing heavy. And this was back to the newspapers. But white people never got a chance to see these. And it's only recently that a book came out elaborating on her that somebody like me could find out about all of this. And that's Jackie Holmes. I mean, and so she was a celebrity in the way that comic book people, well, they were, because I mean, a lot of those newspaper comic book people were the highest earners in the world of literature, writing, anything. I mean, like the author of Little Orphan Annie, he, I think one year was like $150,000 in the 30s, and Little Abnett was up to $200,000. I mean, this is like big money. I mean, we're talking millions. Right, we'll go on now. Now, this is the straightforward rendition by Fawcett Comics of black comics. That's very rare, that one over there, apparently. Only about 100 in the world are still around. And they just, you know, the same really as any others. But, you know, they're well done, but not brilliant, but they're all very heart-rending, all of those. As so much is, well. Now, this is just an oddity. A white slave and abuse and oppression, and it's like an American attack on the British aristocracy and the fight for freedom. And that's the cover there, Romantic Adventures, which are all very good. It's just, I flashed on this one because it was a white slave, and so unusual. Now this is I'm going to the race thing, you see. That trooper was a vehement racist against the Indians. And this is and then he falls in love with a girl who grew up with the Indians after they'd massacred her family. But she refused to leave the Indians to live in the white world because she felt the Indians treated her better than the values that were existent in the white world. Anyhow, something happens and he sees the light, and that the Indians are not bad, but he's a bigot. I mean, there's very unpleasantly heavy stuff in this. And finally the chief saves the lives of the troopers, of the whole fort, and they do get together in the end, and she does agree to go live in the white world under more Indian sympathetic environment. Right, now, you can see that, see, that looks a bit like the artist Joe Kubert, who did some great, I didn't put them in here, I don't know why not, Hollywood stories. And they really very, very aggressive storyline. But anyhow, here's the chap with a whip. Fancies that girl who's on the high wire, and that she thinks she loves the blonde. And the blonde is basically plotting to murder her. And for the benefit of owning the circus or something. It's always very dramatic in the circus. And the one that, the ape man that loves her tries to just force his way to her, but she gets a slap with a whip. And then we go on, and here what happens is she's plotting to, that's the guy plotting to kill her, and then he arrives and saves her. Yes, he releases the lion on her. And that's pretty good, that, actually. And he fights the lion, and then he says, I've done it for the girl I love, and he says, now I'll never bother you again. Saved her. And she says, don't go. Now this, that's very sensual, and this is all part of those ones where some awful, awful stuff is being plotted. And this is the poor deprived girl who has aspirations and will stop at nothing. And again, in that storyline, there's a girl looking after the old man, and she inveigles this boyfriend to murder the old man she's looking after so that she can benefit. And this is, right, there's faces, and there's a lot about the guilt of the past and what you can escape from, and how you can't escape from anything. But that's very nicely done, the way, it's shaded in the background, the vaporous shades of the past. And she's got to try and explain what happened. Did she really murder somebody or not? Well, and this one, it's again two girls, the one very clean cut, and the other one has been advertising in newspapers and luring men away or something, and stealing from them. Not stealing from them, blackmailing them through Lonely Hearts, picking her victims through Lonely Hearts, and trying to shove the blame on the clean-cut girl. But it all comes out in the wash, and it's a reasonable ending. Now, that spiv gangster down in the corner, you can tell he's that, can't you? He smokes cigarettes. And in 1952, meets a blind girl on a park bench, and they get talking, and lo and behold, his brother is the most eminent surgeon in the country. So he goes to his brother and sets it all up, sort of thing, and he actually blackmails the brother to do the operation, to see the girl and do everything. And so, because the brother wants nothing to do with him because he's a criminal. And then the criminal says, look, I'm in love with a girl. And he says, you can't be, you're a criminal. You can't be in love with somebody who sounds so sweet. And he says, I am in love with her, and you're going to operate, or I'm going to shoot you, and I'm going to reform. Next one. So there he's back with the old cronies, and he's saying, it's all over, and then there's a fight, and he kills most of them, and he in turn gets killed. Look at the eyes. I find this so weird. This one, those eyes. Meanwhile, the surgeon brother has fallen in love with the girl. And guess where the eyes came from? Well, from the dead brother. So I suppose that's a happy ending. Right, now this one is it's an older man, younger woman, but the level, it's the head of an architectural firm, and he takes this girl on and trains her, and he makes her into something. And then he basically blackmails her because he's elevated her so high, she should be obligated to him. And he puts her on in society, and he's so horrible to her. Here's something to help you remember who you are and what I've made of you. I see you almost forgotten, because she's taken an interest in another man or some young man, and then she runs out, and that's sorry. And then but it's just that slap again. It's so violent. Now this is a very strange story. The Confessions of Thelma Gray. This lady has a very nice husband and lifestyle, and she has a husband presumed dead, who they go out to a party, and this strange fellow dressed like the devil approaches her and talks to her, and it turns out to be her ex-husband, who is obviously not dead. And so she's trapped now in this situation, and they have a cliff-top encounter, and he's obviously, look at that, isn't that a wonderfully loony look on that face? And he steps back and falls into the rocks. So she's going to lose, that's the good husband, the good lady, and he falls off, and she's, she's accused of murder and it goes to court and it all. This one is just a little bit unusual, so I put it in, because I quite like the graphics. It's women, it's a stand-in, I think, for a singer or something, and it's just, the women explode. And it's like a cat fight, as they say. And she's come back for vengeance, someone, so I can go on with my act. She started the scene. No, she didn't, Agatha. You did. This is just a very interesting cover from a quite good series, showing the different levels. I mean, these are proper character stories. They may be vignettes, some of them, but they do have depth to them. Whereas you couldn't say that about the culture generally. You know, everything is all for effect. You know, even the horror comics, the superheroes, it's all like the graphic impact. And this is the narrative sensibility that dominates. And so no wonder, you know, I'll say this again, McCarthy was trying to make moves to get this thing under control, because who knows where it could have led to. This is the thing, because everything else, the whole thing about McCarthy is he could control things and dominate. And what was this saying about American women? It wasn't clear, because it was saying everything. But what it was definitely saying was gutsiness and the rights of women. And so really, as far as the burgeoning feminism was going, this was a major, major thing. Next. Now this is one of my favourite artists, Manny Stallman. He's got his name there, actually. I mean, those dresses, and through that static frame posture, with again those black heavy lines, just like the woman I spoke about in 1941, Clark Mills. They got that same kind of impact, and they're good stories, and they're just magnificent. I mean, that spider web top of that dress there, and those colours. I mean, I just think that's exceptional. Next one, and this is how it resolves itself. The movie star, her stand-in, falls in love with her boyfriend, and of course loses him, and she plots revenge on the stand-in. And to prove that what she's about to do, they leave a gun invitingly close by, and she picks up the gun and shoots, wants to kill them. And of course, it's blanks. They set the whole thing up. And that's a Manny Stallman Hollywood story. And there's a lot about snobbery, and you see this woman is very denigratory about the waitress, and who is deliberately tripped by somebody. And it's this saga of how she finds her feet, and then the boyfriend of the nasty heiress snob comes to her rescue, and a romance starts. Now, this is another blind story, where, I mean, well, Glenn, do you think you can love the new Noreen, who's had this operation on the whole face? That depends on whether plastic surgery has remodeled your attitude as well as your face. So, next one. And of course, she's beautiful after the accident. Sorry, it's not a blind story. It's just this plastic surgery story. So, anyhow, the chap is true in that one. And she's, I don't know, really. Now, this is a campaign trail where this woman manages this chap, and really, he was a very honest, decent fellow who wasn't getting anywhere. And this girl masterminds his emergence into international significance, and he gets a bit carried away and doesn't really appreciate what this woman has done for him. And she just has to leave him. Next one, sorry. And he then finds out that it was her that did all the press work, and without her he loses the election. So it's about poetic justice, I suppose. Now, this is another strange one. This chap has a memory of a girl that he once met many years ago, and he has a fairy tale image of her beauty, substance and significance, and he can't forget her. And but the truth is something like that she was a pretty rough number. And anyhow, go to the next one. And he goes around with the help of this sweet, lovely girl to find out what happened to that girl. And of course he didn't know what criminality was involved. He gets beaten up, he gets abused, he gets robbed. And then finally, I know it sounds crazy, but even after 2 years I can't forget her. And then finally, at the end, I don't care any no longer. Julia's dead as far as I'm concerned. I love you, no one else. You're crazy, but wonderful. Oh, what is this? Between two sisters. Oh, so the next one. Yeah, and they're competing for this man. And the one sister says she's only got 3 months to live, that she's dying. But he mustn't tell anybody to win him away, because he's the naive innocent from the good girl sister. And it, well, I said, this is another, it's all, actually, I keep on hopping back, blackmail, manipulation. This is the American reality, I suppose. And maybe McCarthy was freaked, everything was just too truthful. And anyway, she smacks the chap she works for because he says he doesn't love her. She gets knocked down by a car. She pretends to be much worse off than she is and lies and blackmails him and justifies it because she was in love. Yeah. And he finds out how manipulated he has been and walks out on her. Now, these artists, of which this is Bill Ward. He wasn't in comic books for that long, and he went off into the erotic world, and you can see why quite easily. But they are magnificent, and I think, what do they call the filigree artists? The lingerie artists. Now we're getting now towards the end. Now that's Frank Rosetta, who is artistically one of the biggest names in the culture of comic books in general. In romance, he did quite a few, and they're all very luscious for the eye, but they're all very limp. And he did one newspaper strip, Johnny Comet, I think it was called, and that was just vapid. And all his stories are just, I don't know, but he draws magnificently. So he's a big deal. And this is, Thompson. No, what was his name? It's written there. Johnson. That's right, Walter Johnson. Well, I think worked for Andy Capp on Little Abner. And he's got that strong graphic, which, as you've heard me say, I particularly like, because it's like got a sort of a narrative impact. And you read those things and they just register on you. The thick line, etc. Now, next. Now, this is Matt Baker, who died when he was 36, and he worked for St. John, and it was St. John Publishing, which is one of the most highly regarded of the 300 titles that came out. The St. John ones were considered the most literate, the most artistic, and they really were, very, very much more sophisticated and presented stories than a lot of what I've shown you. Well, you can see from the artwork, and it was unusual because he was black, and he was drawing. He was the master of white cheesecake. So, but I don't know what he died of, or something. And juvenile delinquency, he did a lot of that, and that's what this one is about, right? Now, this is one of the most talented artists that worked in the comic book culture. Everett Kinsler. He did some westerns which are redolent with atmosphere. I'm very interested in atmosphere, and very few artists can sustain the homogeneity and the chiaroscuro that can produce impressive atmosphere, mood and atmosphere. And a lot of my favourites are from this an Italian I like very much, who's more of an artist, big graphic novels, whose work has got, he did this One Thing Fires, which has got such a mood to it. Sorry, I'm getting away from the women. Back to the women. Anyhow, Kinsler did quite a few romance ones. He packed up comics to become, for 20, 30 years, the most eminent portrait artist in America. He did all the presidents and things like that. He's a really big deal. And, well, sad to say, come to the end. And I'm going to just summarize the next one. Finally, the golden age of romance stands alone in the comics culture and also in the canon of 20th century popular literature. The extraordinary success through 1949 to 1954 is a phenomenon yet to be explained. However, a few truths are irrefutable. In the main, it was the simplicity of the feminine dilemmas and the easy identification with the everyday which made these stories so accessible. There was nothing fanciful or beyond belief. No one punched through concrete or leapt over skyscrapers. They were about predicaments which could happen to any woman at any time. Those stories of evincing excess testosterone, though often well crafted, were secondary to the heart of the matter. The ethos of romance comics stemmed from the female point of view, tales to inform and comfort women and make men pause to reflect on gender persecution. During the terrifying, hateful McCarthy years, romance, like the emergence of the internet, was thought to be a threat, in this case a threat to white male domination. An instinctive fear of the feminine lay at the heart of the matter, and as a result the entire industry was brought to its knees by McCarthy-inspired paranoia. The whole comic book world was killed off effectively in 1954, and a code was produced they all had to adhere to, and those that didn't, and there was like, they went before a committee, sort of like the sort of committees that the juvenile, HUAC against juvenile delinquency, what was it called? It was juvenile delinquency, and they blamed juvenile delinquency on the comics, and they got everything passed, and it was killed off, just like that. Overnight, I mean, 3/4 of the romance comics just died. And the ones that survived were like tepid imitation sketches without substance. I mean, it's amazing, even the colour seemed to have faded, let alone the level of literature and the art, because everybody was terrified of romance comics, something. And yet not that much was said, whereas the horror comics were attacked, and it was like the coup de grace, and that was it. And so I still don't understand all the ins and outs of everything. And, you know, this is about the time also that McCarthy, just after this big explosion of HUAC and the persecution of comic books in 54, it's just after that Eisenhower pulled up his socks and cracked down on Senator Eugene McCarthy. And then after that, he slipped very fast into alcoholism. Everybody shunned him, and he died an appropriately unhappy man. Well, I hope that's given you a little bit of something, and that's it.